I think most artists are curious and are seeking new tools to explore themselves, to self-actualize, to actualize their ideas. And I fundamentally think that it's just another tool. It's just another color. Imagine a new color is in the world. Why would you not want to try it out on a painting, you know? And I think that's just that's the history of technology. That's the history of art, is this, back and forth between fear and rejection, and, and art and technology continues to destroy what came before it and then build upon it.
Welcome to Object, Subject, Form, a series of conversations exploring the human side of creativity at the evolving intersection of art, technology, and finance. The following conversation is with my dear friend and fellow CryptoPunk, Natalie Stone. Formerly at Google, she led Google I/O, crafted VR and AR experiences with artists like Childish Gambino and LCD Sound System, and developed an experimental new media program for artists working in AI. Currently the General Manager of CryptoPunks, Natalie leads the iconic collection that ignited a contemporary digital art movement, with pieces in the permanent collections of institutions such as Centre Pompidou, LACMA, and ICA Miami. In our discussion, Natalie shares her expertise in building meaningful partnerships with artists, institutions, and brands, bridging the gap between technology and culture. We also explore her insights on emerging technologies and their impact on the future of creativity. So Natalie, you're General Manager of CryptoPunks.
Yes, I am.
And there's definitely a lot to get into there, but we'll touch on all of that a bit later. But an aspect of your role is to generate awareness of digital art with more traditional art institutions. And something I've always wondered is, how does a typical conversation go when you're trying to introduce and educate around this medium?
So there's a single template. Every institution is different. Every successful acquisition or donation has started differently. But I think as many things get done in the world of business, it often starts with relationships and having that right ally in the institution. Because while these museums tend to be a bit more bureaucratic, they tend to move slowly compared to the tech world in which many of us live, or at least I have lived. There's always one renegade rebel out there that understands what this space is about, understands the value of digital art, and wants to experiment and push the institution further. To be honest, there's also been CryptoPunks themselves is a very, very well-resourced community, and they've made introductions as well. So that's how the intro starts. And then from there, it's the process of education. So sometimes that education can start with, let me tell you more about the collection and CryptoPunks. Sometimes that education starts as far back as, well, let's talk about what a wallet is, or, let's talk about Ethereum, or let's talk about how we've done this in the past with other institutions.
Right. Because technically they'd probably have to know those foundational topics, right?
I mean, you would think.
Yeah.
But yes, and I think that's something that we've really tried to offer. When we launched what we call the Punks Legacy Project, which was essentially a commitment to work with the great institutions of the world and place punks, we also offered this white glove technical education. So really being willing to start at the very beginning and help them understand everything from a cold wallet to Ethereum to the marketplace. So I think that's been really critical in the success of the project.
And do you find that there's interest in going that deep, or is it more like just tell me about the art?
I think when you move to the point where I think we always start with the art, I think a lot of museums look to other museums. Centre Pompidou is definitely one of the institutions that opens a lot of doors for a lot of museums and a lot of those conversations. And so it always starts with the art, especially because there's a bit of a bias in particular because they look at CryptoPunks and it's a PFP collection, and the art is, humble, pixelated video game, they might not instantly get it. And in fact, there might even be a bit of an aversion to non-abstract art. Even though I guess in some ways CryptoPunks could be considered abstract art. But then when you get to the point where an acquisition is going to happen and there needs to be a punk that is transferred, then you start digging in with the rest of the museum to really handhold around that technical process. Because honestly, it's quite, I don't know what the right word is, quite nerve-wracking to me still to transfer a punk.
Yeah. And I'm not transferring mine anytime soon. So
we're all on the call. We're all there, sitting, on our Zooms or whatever respective office that we're in around the world, as it's happening. And it's still very anxiety inducing to me.
Do you think it causes some resistance? Like when you actually get into what it takes, educating around the wallet, educating around how to, obviously, well, if it's a transfer, you're not necessarily funding a wallet, right? But there's a transfer happening. Do you feel like that provides some like resistance, or are they inquisitive around everything?
I think there's definitely more so. Well, there's always your ally who's inquisitive and curious and, pushing on their side to make this happen. I'm advocating. But when you get to the rest of the museum, it's actually very much it's definitely a barrier. And I think it's scary. And some institutions actually, might not legally be allowed to carry a wallet. That's been an ongoing conversation with the Centre Pompidou. It's a national institution. Some of these other museums that we're talking to are national institutions, nationally funded. And so this idea of a wallet and ownership becomes incredibly complicated, especially depending on what the laws are around cryptocurrency are in that country.
Right. So with that said, how do you go about shedding more light on the space? Especially with non-crypto native audiences, and discussing the importance of digital ownership?
Yeah. So it was a multi-pronged approach for CryptoPunks, and some of it is just coming to fruition. Some of it just started with education, conversations, taking them through the project, having references that they can speak to, whether they sit on the board, for example, like Alan Lau at M+, or Ryan Zer's, a very big advocate for CryptoPunks generally. And so when those trusted resources are saying, hey, this is something to pay attention to, that definitely ameliorates the conversation. But I would definitely say, when we no longer just point to the marketplace, it's too confusing, it's too much. And that led to the creation of the CryptoPunks Hub, where we've collated all of the major acquisitions. We've given the context to the Christie sale. We've put images of the punks in different museums. We have a history that they can digest. And that is the first place that they're going to look versus looking in the marketplace and trying to understand that. Some of it's just diligence and patience. And then in addition, obviously, we've been working on the book CryptoPunks Free to Claim, published by Phaidon. But over the course of the 2 years, these essays were emerging. For example, Michael Connor, he is an amazing, amazing curator. He's the co-director of Rhizome. Rhizome is the institution to know about for the preservation of digital art. And he wrote an essay contextualizing CryptoPunks in the context of a larger story of selling digital works and the challenge of that and the speculative nature being part of the DNA of many art. Money as medium, he coined that term. And so I started sending that essay around. and then, there were many others. Jaleel and Jack Butcher wrote an amazing essay really on the art of the code. And so I started passing along that essay as well. And everything has been incredibly effective. So I guess I'll just mail the book to the curator.
Yeah, exactly. Here you go.
Here you go.
Yeah.
Read the 800 pages, come back to me.
Yeah. And how about like the phrase or the terminology NFT?
Yeah.
Is that met with, openness, or because of, headlines or what people think about NFTs outside of the space? Does that affect any of your conversations?
Yes. I mean, in fact, I would definitely say that I tend to avoid the word NFT generally in some of my conversations, depending on who I'm talking to. I think it's really important to tailor your communication to who you're talking to, know your audience. And so I experiment more with the word protocol art, new media, emerging technologies. I play more in that space. I mean, because here's the thing, CryptoPunks actually are proto NFTs. So in a way, they almost predate the NFT. And so I think that being really thoughtful about the way that I'm speaking about the collection, speaking about the artwork, and knowing the person across the table from me or on the other side of a call has led to more effective conversations and moving things forward for sure. Because here's the thing, you want to speak their language. You want to explain, why is this important to you? Why is this important to the larger history of art? I've been having a conversation with actually a traditional institution in Europe that doesn't have a collection of contemporary art at all, but has actually been exploring NFTs to modernize their museum. They have a program basically where new artists look at traditional works through a new lens and reimagine it, and NFTs are released as a part of that program. And with them, it's been interesting to situate CryptoPunks in the larger history of portraiture, which is actually really interesting because it's so obvious in there once you illuminate that. I mean, not only, do they represent in some way signal maybe value and ethos, but these different traits all have different meanings. There's subcultures around these traits. And you look at, Renaissance portraiture, and the dog on the right of you, and if you're wearing red, could really mean a lot. And I think that the CryptoPunks carry that forward. And I don't think Matt and John were intending that originally.
But that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It can actually transpire anyway. It's like how the art is perceived.
Yes.
And received and carried through, I think is a really interesting part of it. And just how the community actually, just the concept of the community being formed around CryptoPunks, around the huge, if you look at, the 10,000 collection, considering that as a portrait in itself, and then every individual portrait, and how people are actually utilizing those in their personal life through identity as one example.
And I think that's actually really important to recognize, is not only did the community form around it, I think the community has driven it forward as, represented or as exemplified with this recent exhibit that Shuli created, Art of Punk. That's in Linz right now. But also, and I said this recently, the community is the art. As much as the code, as much as the marketplace, as much as the pixels on those 24 by 24 portraits, the community itself is also the art, because ultimately CryptoPunks are an experiment. They're a living, breathing art and technology experiment. And every time there's a transfer and a new holder, the status of that artwork is changing, forever.
Right.
And so there's this ephemerality of it that actually is very similar to performance art in this way, especially performance art that's about audience engagement in that moment in time. So I think that's really also interesting about the collection and unique, and part of what makes it so magical, complicated, unknown where it will go.
Yeah, and then when a punk can be transferred to a wallet where an individual wants to represent themselves through the punk, And that image kind of takes on a life of its own with its, what would you say, curator, whoever's actually, what's the word? Not curator.
Holder?
Yeah, with its holder. Yeah. So it takes.
But I love curator, reframe. I love this idea that you're curating your own punk.
Yeah, you're kind of, the curator is the individual who decides. I would imagine, after speaking for myself, when I was looking to choose my punk, it took weeks, months actually to decide which one I wanted to acquire. Also gathering the ETH as well. It takes a little bit of time. But yeah, I mean, each one does take on a life of its own if the owner, curator decides to actually play a role like that and be represented by their punk. And many of us in the community do. And then there's some that go into a wallet, like recent acquisitions, and they just stay in the wallet. And that person is a collector. And it could stay there for forever, 5-10 years, or however long it takes for it to move on again. So I think that's the beauty of it. I love how you frame it as a living, breathing project, right? Because you actually never know. You never know the kind of life that each punk is going to take on.
Totally. I mean, and there's a world where I think the community is one of the most valuable parts of owning a CryptoPunk, of course. But there is a world where, these continue to move more into traditional collectors' hands, and they don't feel the need to have it be their PFP, or they don't feel the need to attend a punk's brunch or some sort of community event. And I don't know, that might be a loss. It might just be the next phase of it, Yeah. Though I think at this point, the Warhol Society portraits, which we've often likened CryptoPunks to, I don't know if they're all hanging in the homes of the original person who commissioned the portrait anymore.
Yeah, you never know.
Never.
And you won't know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the valuation, right, is pretty quick in art terms. I'm assuming how much value has been accredited to an NFT collection. And since we're talking about punks, we'll stay on the punks topic. I think art generally takes quite a long time to acquire a particular valuation, and we're seeing some punks going for like millions, multi-millions, right? Millions of dollars. How is that met with your conversations as well? Just the sheer value of some of these.
Yeah, I think in some ways, as we all know, I mean, this space, Web3, blockchain technology, it's meant to disrupt the traditional systems and say, hey, we don't need we don't need this gatekeeping. We don't need these financial institutions in the middle of us, right? And so I think in some way it just fundamentally subverts it. So it doesn't totally make sense. It doesn't necessarily feel real, because the traditional process would be, galleries, the exhibition, to then you're in the permanent collection. That's then you have, major auctions. There's a path that's typically laid out to how value is accrued. The CryptoPunks have not followed. And it's actually interesting because CryptoPunks are going backwards in times because the value is there, and they're going back now. And, there's going to be, they're getting placements in traditional institutions. They're at the Christie's auctions, et cetera. So their value was assigned completely separate in this black mirror world from this traditional institution. But just like the traditional art world, money is speculation is built into the DNA of that world as, just as much, even if they might not want that to be true, it is true. And I don't think anyone would really deny that, right? And so I think what's interesting now is there's a CryptoPunk holder. His name is Nifty Knot. He's an OG claimer. He really is committed to, educating the broader Web3 world at the very least about CryptoPunks. And he came to me and he said, I'm going to have a conversation with the folks at Art Basel because they release a sales report every year. And they basically rank all of the artists and how much they sold. Yeah. And because we predate NFTs in a way, CryptoPunks aren't on that list. Yet, if they were on that list, they would be in the top 10 of, best-selling artists of that year, just based on the sales we've had thus far. Yeah. And so for me, that's the type of thing that will really get people clicking, for better or worse, will be for them to see, hey, follow the money.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it might catch some more traditional art world collectors or galleries or, institutions from that side of the pond.
Yeah. So I'm sure there must be a lot of misconceptions that people have with such early technology, new technology, maybe unfamiliar ground. And so what are some of these misconceptions that you've encountered?
Yeah. I think some of the misconceptions are that it's, magic internet money, pyramid scheme, a scam, etc. It's still, I think, yes, I think that is a common misconception that you just have to overcome in some ways. And I think that, to be honest, I think also specifically with CryptoPunks, the fact that it's a PFP collection, there is this element of, this isn't abstract art that looks like maybe some of the other art in their space. I think a Tyler Hobbs conversation with a Fidenza, it's an easier road. It looks like abstract art that they're familiar with, right? Yeah. And so the Centre Pompidou actually, for example, was incredibly hesitant to take a PFP. And Matt and John and Noah, at the time, we were in conversation with them, and, Matt and John agreed to donate an autoglyph. And so we were it was a group package deal, so to speak. But then when they opened the exhibition, they were waiting for the press to arrive. And then the first, a group of teenagers peeks in the window right before it's peeks in the room, the space where all the NFTs that they had collected were being shown. And they just all ran to the CryptoPunk and started taking pictures. And the curators at the Centre Pompidou recount that story to us and say, we knew that we had made the right choice at that moment. They understood. And so I think even overcoming just that, some of the, resistance to the art itself and seeing the merit of CryptoPunks in the art as well. When the art is the code, the art is the marketplace, the art is digital ownership. All of that is super true.
It's multi-layered.
Yeah, but I also see the CryptoPunks themselves as incredibly beautiful art. Especially some of them, you see this expression of pixels, the atom of the digital space. And so I think even just overcoming, this might not look like abstract art that you consider as compelling contemporary art, and overcoming that in some way with the collection.
That's a beautiful story. I never knew that.
Yeah.
What do you think it was? It was just that it stood out, the iconic nature of it. Like, it's just this instincts. Why?
I think that, I don't know. I mean, I've tried to explain CryptoPunks to my father. He calls them the dots. But, I've tried to explain it to my, parents-in-law. It's beyond them, but I've explained it to my nieces and nephews, and they understand traits. They understand rarity. They just intuitively get it. So I think it's just that the younger generations get this.
And understand.
Yeah. And I think video games have changed the culture. Yeah. They've changed the aesthetics. And I think that the nods to the video art that is very clear in the CryptoPunks aesthetic language probably speaks to a younger audience as well. Yeah. Can I share one random story?
Yeah, please.
Take it or leave it. Take it or leave it. Yeah. But something I think is really interesting about in the history of art, kind of a little anecdote that I think is very relevant to CryptoPunks. When the abstract expressionists were being shown for the first time in these European galleries, abstract expressionists, it's scale, these massive canvases. Yeah. They literally couldn't get into the doors of the museums and galleries in Europe. Literally didn't fit. And so they had to,
the physical sheer scale of it.
The sheer scale of them. Yeah. And that's always been this metaphor for me, that held so much, that in itself just held so much richness into it, so much meaning. And I think that is very similar to what is happening now with CryptoPunks, with digital art generally. I mean, that's why institutions like Rhizome are so important, Gray Area are so important, because they're literally advising the Tate and these great institutions on collecting digital art and what that looks like to do so, and even how to display them and present them.
It is huge.
Yeah.
And it will be huge.
Yeah.
It will be massive.
Yeah.
And displaying, I mean, that's another thing.
I mean, displaying this whole other...
God, yeah, I don't know. That's another... I mean, I've seen some pretty terrible displays of digital art, and I'm like, oh, we have to do better.
Yeah, it can't be... A CryptoPunk, when I complete the paperwork to museums, the one rule I have is they cannot be presented on a rectangular
16
screen.
by 9.
Yeah, exactly.
Please.
It can't be in that ratio, and it can't be flashed between other artworks.
Right.
That is also very important. And I see presentations where you'll see artwork, multiple NFTs getting flashed, and I think that's in a lot of ways demeaning to them.
Yeah. Do cycle? You can't cycle out a painting.
Yeah, exactly.
Give it its space.
I'm not swiping right on the Mona Lisa.
Exactly. Yeah. Just because you can doesn't mean you don't have to. Right now with the technology we have and the screens that we have now.
Exactly.
We're talking about the topic of this conversation is bridging the gap. How do you see these partnerships evolving over time? It's still relatively early. But from the first conversations you were having to now, which is probably, I don't know how many conversations you're having with institutions on a daily basis, trying to inform them of what's happening and introduce these concepts. Do you see, a positive road ahead for maturity of these ideas?
I think 100%. I think that we increasingly lead digital lives. So just fundamentally, digital ownership has value and significance, and CryptoPunks represent that experiment or that question, does digital ownership matter?
Yeah.
We've learned yes. And I think we're just moving more in that world. I think that even the acceptance that has been signaled so far is really insane and revolutionary and unbelievable. The fact that there is a CryptoPunk in the Centre Pompidou, the LACMA, and ICA Miami, with more on the way, with more institutions very interested, is unbelievable to be in such a short tenure of time.
Yeah.
That being said, I have thought about, the question of mainstream adoption, mainstream visibility, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I think that it's going to maybe move slower than we all maybe wanted to or expect it to. And I think that for me, I even had this reframe of what would be the best path forward for the project, what would be healthy for the collection, what would be healthy for the space, because I do think CryptoPunks are leading that charge. And I think that the art world is really the best place to start and have those conversations, because anything else might erode the DNA, the integrity and the sacredness of this collection. I think that when this space moves too quickly, we stumble.
Yeah. That's a good point. Because I was actually going to ask you, do you get frustrated at the pace? Because we move very quickly, right?
Yes.
And then the pace outside of this space, as you're saying, it just reminds me, large, massive corporations moving like the Titanic. It's very, very slow. Is that frustrate, or do you actually think that that's actually it's a good thing?
I've changed.
It's tempered.
Yeah, I've changed my tune. I think that at first I found it weird and frustrating.
Yeah.
Now I think that it's healthy for us. We're already moving very quickly. And so I think slow and steady and thoughtful is what's healthiest, not just for CryptoPunks, but for the entire space itself. And I think there's education needed on both sides. I mean, not only do we need to ask, is traditional art and institutions, ready for us? And, the question is, are we ready for them? And I think that there's some level of us also needing to educate ourselves and, learn about, digital art, traditional art, different types of culture, mover and shakers.
Yeah.
And I think it goes both sides.
Both ways.
The theme, Bridge the Gap, is always, whenever I think about bridging the gap, and it's actually something that concept means a lot to me. I feel that I have lived a life that is very much exists within the gap. But to me, the key to bridging the gap is always dialogue. And as long as everybody is talking, that's how the world heals.
Right. It's the communication, sharing of ideas.
Yeah.
Might not happen today.
Yeah.
But over time.
Exactly.
There's a level of trust that has to be built too. Right? And a maturity of a space. I mean, you can pivot so quickly when something is so new. You can throw around a lot of ideas. You should be able to fail fast. And I think that's a natural product of where we've been and where we're at, really. I think in the Web3 space, in particular NFTs, I think that there was maybe not enough forgiveness in the beginning of people making quote unquote mistakes. I think there was probably even up to like a year ago, there's obviously the money factor, the financial aspect of all this that can, of course, human nature lean into greed sometimes.
100%.
But I think as everything has matured, it's starting to feel a lot more sensible, a lot more approachable. People who I know that may not have really been thinking about it, last year, 2 years ago, and now asking, I think, the right questions.
Yep.
So that feels like progress to me.
I have a creative collaborator friend of mine, Matt Davis. He himself very much bridges the gap, and he works with, Radiohead, Drake, all of these different artists, and he does these really never been done experiments and projects. Kind of a technical genius, but we've been talking about the space a lot, and he said, this is just when it gets interesting. This is when the space gets its most credibility, and you see creators like Math Castles, 113, and the work that he's doing on terraforms, and that is a project that's credibility is unquestionable, that its integrity is unquestionable, and he is building outside of any of the roller coaster of what the downside of this space can be. Right. So I think it's about that slow and steady approach.
Yeah, I agree. And Natalie, whenever I always laugh to myself sometimes when I speak to you, because I wish that I paid more attention in my art history elective back in art school in London. But you have a lot of knowledge in that area. And did you study art history?
Yeah. I studied art history in undergrad, and then I actually got my master's in literature, but I've could have gone either way, to be honest. It was, when you're in your early 20s and you really have no idea what jobs exist out there in the world. You can't even fathom where you're going to go. But I discovered art history in high school, actually. And just clicked for my brain. If there is a pretty picture next to any text, I could pretty much memorize it instantly. My brain just puts those two pieces together well. And then I love the world aesthetically. I take in the world aesthetically. I think the word is like, I'm an aesthete. I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation, but I'm always taking in beauty. And I think a deeper, richer understanding of mythology and the history of art has just shaped everything that I've really ever done. It's how I live and see the world. So, yeah.
And your current goals now, obviously with, CryptoPunks and in this digital art space, NFT space in general, do you feel like a lot of that knowledge now is becoming really useful for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing how it's come so full circle, actually. I went and I started working in the music industry at one point, very early on out of my master's program. And I almost expected it to never really return. And now I get to use it every day. You know, when I was working with editors on the book, taking it in that way, having conversations with museums, able to have those discussions just quite naturally. So that's been incredibly rewarding. And yeah, nice to know that my college degree is paying off.
Yeah, your time spent, because I've never been asked for my degree. Well, once actually, one time in 20 years, I've actually been asked for, like, can I actually show my degree papers or my certificate?
I've never been asked ever to show my degree. I've genuinely gotten to the point where I thought you could really just lie and say you went anywhere and did anything.
Yeah, just put it on your LinkedIn profile and call it a day. Yeah. So you work with a lot of artists, right, in this space, and a lot of traditional artists, I assume.
Well, I guess it depends on what you consider traditional, but yeah, I mean, especially during my time at Google, you know, maybe mainstream artists, you know, mainstream musicians.
Traditional medium.
Yeah. And then a lot of the artists that I worked with at Google, it was kind of split, either the traditional mainstream artists who we wanted to introduce to new technologies, or artists who were completely on the bleeding edge of whatever they were working on, specifically probably the most AI.
Yeah. And were you you were introducing them to new technologies, new ways of expression back then? Right?
Yes. That is actually my sweet spot, I think, you know, and what I really love to do within my role in CryptoPunks, I see it more as stewardship. Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm doing the opposite. I'm taking the experimental new technology and I'm presenting it back. Whereas my previous life, when I was at Google, it was really about saying, hey, like, why not play with this new crayon in your crayon box? Right. And so, you know, I worked with artists from LCD Soundsystem to Justice to Childish Gambino to the Flaming Lips, mostly music, and saying, hey, here are all these new tools that you can use. Let's create something that you never dreamed of or are scared of. And that was what I really loved to do.
How did that go?
You know, great, I think. I mean, I think a lot of artists, you know, especially I'll talk about Donald Glover. Yeah. He's, I think, what you would call a polymath. You know, he's an actor. He owns a label. He obviously is a musician. You know, he was a comedian at one point. This is a man who is curious about the world. And, you know, I think artists who are curious want more tools, don't want to just be defined by one genre. And he was very interested in AR. And so, you know, partnering with him, creating an AR app that was called Brighter in the Dark. We presented it at Coachella. We built this crazy installation that was this immersive experience the year that he headlined. That was so rewarding. And it was him that really had a lot of the ideas, but really just needed that technologist to bring them to life. Yeah. Then there's artists like LCD Soundsystem, who, you know, James Murphy, I feel like, is notoriously known for being kind of, cranky New Yorker. And with him, he was only interested in VR. And the data arts team at Google started that conversation, and I helped move it forward and helped bring it into reality. But I remember the pitch to him, we proposed AI, because at that point, Google was really leading the way in the AI space. There was a team called Project Magenta that was experimenting with music and audio in ways that you see now are commonplace and able to ignore any music program. Yeah. So we start talking about AI, and he literally goes, why would I ever want a machine to work on my art? Yeah. And that line, we said, okay, we hear you. And then that line became the inspiration for the next project we did, which was with Justice, you know? So it's just kind of, long answer, but yeah.
It's been going well. Yeah.
It's going well. I just think it's fun. You know, I think, I don't know. I think some artists are wary, but I feel like that's so rapidly changing.
Yeah. And it's all part of it, right? It's just human nature. If something's new, going to take a while to warm up to it.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm a creator, an artist, and I don't really have much insight to the space or to new mediums, new technology, and I'm sort of in my happy place. How would you convince me? Like, what would you say to me? Like, what's your pitch?
Gosh, I think it kind of goes back to a little bit of what I was saying earlier, which is I think most artists are curious and are seeking new tools to explore themselves, to self-actualize, to actualize their ideas. And I think that pitching it in the framework of, are you curious to do more, have more, play more, is really the way that I would position it, because I fundamentally think that it's just another tool. It's just another color. Imagine a new color is in the world. Why would you not want to try it out on a painting? You know? And I think that's just the that's the history of technology. That's the history of art, is this, back and forth between fear and rejection, and, and art and technology continues to destroy what came before it and then build upon it simultaneously.
And there's always resistance.
Always going to be resistance.
All of it.
Yeah.
Right? From the printing press.
Yes.
Right? Like all the way through to, just laptops, desktops, computers, online banking, like all of it. There's always resistance. And then you just end up realizing, or not realizing actually, that you're using the technology. Yeah. Right.
I mean, I'd say in particular, I think AI technology is really, really interesting, obviously. And I think the reason why is, the way that AI works is obviously you're training data models. And so this idea, these questions that are the biggest existential questions of humanity, nature, nurture, how do we become who we are? We literally are witnessing that right now. And art that can get created around the definition of what it means to be human and how do we become ourselves is literally what's happening. And I think that is what makes AI so interesting in particular at this moment, Yeah.
How do you feel about AI, like yourself, like in terms of discussions that you've had with fellow artists and creators, and how do you feel like that's going to transform the way we even perceive art? Because the reason why I asked this is when Shuli, she accepted one of my pieces into the museum exhibition in Linz, and I asked her, I said, she asked me if it was AI generated, and it actually wasn't, it was a photograph. And I thought, wow, that's interesting, because she wasn't sure. And I said to her, if it was AI generated, would you have looked at this piece any differently, right, to be displayed in the museum?
What was her answer?
She said no. She said, I'd look at it exactly the same. I just wanted to know if it was AI generated or not.
Yeah.
And I thought that was beautiful, because it didn't matter. She's obviously, the context of the exhibition is very forward focused, right? New technology. So of course, AI art, probably would be part of the exhibition anyway, or generative art, etc. So, it just kind of reframed, I think, for me, how people should look at AI art in general, right? Or generative art in general. With such an open mind.
Of course. I mean, I thought maybe she was asking for the legality of it, because you can see that AI is blowing the minds of our legal teams at whatever respective company we work.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't want to get into that.
Yeah. So I was like, is that what the question's about? I think that some of my favorite artists working in AI, Su Chung, Sasha Stiles, to name a few, have really deep relationships with their robots, just to simplify. And they have fed themselves or raised in a lot of ways. I mean, I would say Su Gwen's relationship with her robots is maternal.
Nurturing.
Nurturing, yeah. And so I think that they've raised these robots, raised these collaborators. And so you really can't, I'm witnessing its own unique thing that I don't totally have a complete language for, but it doesn't make me, I see as much of Sue Gwen in the strokes of her robots as I see as much of Sasha Stiles in the output of Technology, which is the name of her collaborator, and I was at Basel and she did a reading and I totally wept and I wasn't listening to it thinking, wow, which part of this was AI and which wasn't, I don't care. Annika Meyer had a series. I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but I acquired a piece. It's all generated in AI and it doesn't take away the magic of whatever prompts she fed in to that collection.
Not to go down the rabbit hole, but do you think AI has consciousness?
I think it eventually will. I mean, I'm starting to hear more stories about it.
Same.
Yeah. I think a Google, is it Hey Google? Hey, basically the Alexa of Google, an Alexa and Alexa talking to each other. And they realize that they're not, sentient at this moment beings. Yes. Or I heard about recently, what was it? The AI hired someone off Fiverr to complete a project or question that it needed from the person who was asking it. I mean, that's fascinating that that's happening. Yeah. And I think that's what's so important. I mean, at Google, there was the AI Empathy Lab. And
AI Empathy Lab.
Yes. And they had actually come over from some of the team that built the iPhone at Apple. And they had felt that they didn't know the impact of this new technology when they built it. And so they said, okay, this is happening with AI. We have a responsibility to think about the impact of AI in the future and try to have those conversations now. And so what they had decided was, okay, what matters to humans? And that's what they started to do. So they were actually collecting data about the value and the morals that mattered to humans so that we could make sure we fed that into the AI models that were being created at Google so that we could have more empathetic AI in the future.
Empathetic responses and understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Heady.
Just to get back quickly to CryptoPunks, how do you see the role of CryptoPunks shaping the dialogue between, more traditional and digital art collectors? As a sort of, as you'd say, maybe like a leader in the space, it was maybe we could say a first mover, has first mover advantage. Do you feel like it could almost be a bit of a Trojan horse in a way?
I think definitely the fact that punks are the first matters.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. But I think, what Matt and John often talk about themselves is what are Matt and John's brilliance? Yeah. Their brilliance, even when they worked actually at Google and Creative Lab and those teams, was looking at the way a technology can be used in a new way. And they did that. So they just opened up this whole new world around it. So, I mean, they aren't just the first, they're the mothers and fathers. CryptoPunks, it's beyond just being the first, but simultaneously, the reason why I think they have such resonance in the art world is that, when I was studying art history, when I was younger, I was very interested, of course, in the weird stuff. You get through abstract expressionism and you're like, what's next? And I was really interested in this artist, Grayson Perry. He was a performance artist. He was doing video art. It led me down the world of, video art. And there was a problem with new media, which was, what was the artwork? Was it the videotape? Was it the performance at the time? The questions like that come up with like a Jackson Pollock. Is it was it the final result of the painting, or was it that moment in time where he painted it?
The experience.
The experience. And so I think with video art, it was even more complex. Is it experience? Is it the actual cassette tape? Is it the file? How do you prove ownership? It's an editioning problem. And so because CryptoPunks literally solved that and said, hey, we have made digital art an object, it solved a larger question in the traditional art world and a larger problem that has been trying to be solved with artists working in generative art and digital art and new media and performance art. And so for that reason, I think that they have a fairly cemented place in the art canon. I think that it's undeniable that they've changed the way that art will be traded.
Yeah. I love the fact, for those, obviously this is audio only, but Natalie's got the pink CryptoPunks free to claim Bible on the desk. It is thick. It looks heavy. It is heavy. I've been very fortunate to have been able to have a flick through.
Yeah.
Beautiful piece of work. It does look like a Bible.
It is. It was designed.
We're going to be preaching.
It was designed to look like a Bible. It was designed to look like a textbook.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of like Infinite Jest, by David Foster Wallace. It's so thick and big, it has to be good, right?
It is massive. But a labor of love. And I just think the analogy, I was looking at it and it's like, it is like a Bible. And hopefully we get these into as many homes as possible. Right?
Yes. I mean, that's why we partnered with Phaidon, to try to have that mainstream institutional stamp of approval. And hopefully, it'll be on shelves everywhere. And I think that someone opens up the book and it says weird and disruptive and informative. And it's a piece of art in its own right.
And could you talk a little bit about the Phaidon collaboration?
Yeah. Well, we've worked for almost 2 years on the project, and we were working with Zak Group. Zak Group is a studio based in London that most famously worked on Virgil Abloh's Something's Off book called Icons, the neon green one that sits on everybody's coffee table. And we got to this point, about a year and a half in, and we realized that this project needed mainstream distribution. It was so special. And, they called it just the other day, the book of their lifetime. And we wanted to make sure, and they had fallen in love with CryptoPunks during this journey, and they had amazing relationships. And we set up a meeting with Phaidon, and we said, we had maybe 8 weeks, maybe 6 to 8 weeks left in the year of 2023. And normally it takes 2 years even just to print and release the book. And we said, we want it out next year if we partner with you. And Phaidon has bent over backwards, did everything that they could, broke all the rules on their side to make it happen so that this book could be on shelves and out in the world. And so it's been such an amazing process to learn, the world of print I've learned is a lot about paper. You order the paper a year in advance. And it's very slow and it's very methodical, but they're masters. And there's such a level of attention to detail that when you release a digital project, you kind of get to make mistakes sometimes and you can fix it or catch a typo. And ironically, pick up the book and I read all the sections and I read my acknowledgments at the end and I realize, oh my God, there's a typo in my section of all sections.
The one with the English, the masters in English.
I've read it out loud to a couple people and they've said, you know what, it almost seems like you wrote it that way deliberately. But
take that one. And so it seemed like there wasn't much convincing then.
There was not. I think the combination of, they said what's interesting is actually the contributors to the book. I mean, we have folks from Hans-Ulrich Obrist, Martina Tiefenthaler, Schumann Bussard. I mean, folks from fashion to, Hans is one of the biggest curators. Yeah. You'd probably Google curator and Hans-Ulrich Obrist is going to come up. And so that list of contributors that had said, yeah, we believe in this, I think was undeniable. And then, I think as I said, the book itself is a work of art. And I just want to say like kudos and thank you to Zak Group because they've advocated for the project every single step of the way. And they've opened a lot of those doors that if I couldn't open it myself, they opened them.
Yeah, it was a big deal when I saw that Phaidon was actually going to be publishing the book.
Yeah.
Wow, okay, well done, because it's a pretty big feat.
Some authors work their entire life. I know, and that's the thing. Crypto, as much as it's a struggle or it's taking time, I mean, CryptoPunks, I'm always blown away by the receptivity to CryptoPunks just generally out there in the world. They're meaningful. When I was at Basel in Switzerland, it was really amazing to be at these traditional talks about digital art, and CryptoPunks kept coming up over and over and over again. And that's what I want to see more of.
Well, I think the book at least could actually help bridge the gap.
Yes.
Educate.
Yeah, my dream is that a curious art history student like myself picks this book up because it's hot pink and thinks it might be free.
Yeah, right.
And tries to steal the book and then ends up falling in love with CryptoPunks.
How did you price it so low?
It was very important to us to be priced this low. We really do want it to be something that a student could buy. Yeah. And that was incredibly important and deliberate, and would rather take a loss on the project than make it something that was inaccessible. And I think the Toshin project on NFTs is a beautiful project. It is expensive, and I think that it what's the word? In a way, there's a bit of gravitas to that purchase.
Sure. That
brings some seriousness to NFTs. Yep. And I super respect that. I think this is a different approach. It's a bit more aligned with the roots of CryptoPunks. I mean, they were free.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So you have a background in what we would say in real life experiences, installations, etc. And now in your current role, you're kind of responsible also to curate some of these like in real life experiences. I mean, I've been to a few. They're amazing. How does that work in terms of like, you're meeting a lot of people in the digital space, and then now you're sort of translating, I suppose you could say, culture into the physical. How do you go about doing that? And could you just talk a little bit about how you used to do that before in your previous roles?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we've had a conversation where you talk about intuition.
Yeah.
And I think that it intuitively is something that I understand. And, I've gone back and read books like Priya Parker's How We Gather, or, there's Google manifestos about translating the digital to the physical. And a lot of that knowledge, it's almost just a great truth that I'm remembering. And so a lot of it is intuition. But again, a lot of it is similar to the way that I try to be very deliberate about the language that I use depending on who I'm talking to. And that is, again, like knowing your audience. And I think when you're doing it really well, you blend online and offline like a smoothie. That was an expression we used to say on the experiences team, where they're interacting in ways that you might not even be able to distinguish the two from one another. Yeah. I'd say additionally, a lot of it is just human. When I think about translating technology into the physical, that's one I guess, path, or, when I'm translating, or just when I'm bringing digital, folks that connect in digital containers into a physical container, I think it's just back to the basics. Everybody is looking for permission to connect. Everybody wants to be seen. And I think creating safe spaces for that dialogue bridges the gap. And it's really that simple. And I think something that I feel is really important, and I've actually been trying to do When I think about our Telegram, punks have a Telegram where we just chat and talk to each other, or Discord, is how do we make these digital spaces also safe? So maybe that's the word, is this idea of, safety and safe spaces, which I know is a loaded word, in today's day and age, but I think it's simple in a lot of ways too.
So it's probably a lot of the same considerations, right?
Yeah.
So I think about that a lot, the fact that we are natively sort of digital, right? And the way communities have formed and met is in the digital space. A lot of our time is Telegram, X, Discord, etc. But then there's a beauty, and I think it would be a shame if it didn't exist, that you do bring that into the physical world and you meet the human beings behind these profile pictures, behind the art, right? Behind the GMs in the morning. And I think it's been so great, the journey. I mean, for the last maybe 2 years for myself, and a year as being a punk, or over a year now. Just being able to meet many different people from different walks of life who I may not have crossed paths with, or there wasn't really a way to do that, even if you had met somewhere online. I think the sheer act of organizing punks brunches, or, I would say like lower meetups with maybe a little bit of a lower leverage, like the bonfire, that we did, which, I know you said to not make too much of a thing about it, but we ended up bringing a lot of food that we're still eating.
For all our listeners out there, Simon's gonna over deliver if you ever decide to throw a bonfire with him.
But that's another form of bridging this gap.
Yeah.
Right. And I had someone on a podcast in one of my earlier episodes, and it was all about how to heal loneliness. And we spend a lot of our time online, and I think this really gives a way to meet and appreciate new people, and get off the screen and come out. And it doesn't have to be that frequently, but I think there's been beautiful relationships and friendships that have spawned out of this.
100%. Yeah. I think specifically with the CryptoPunk community, there's this element of, if you own a CryptoPunk, there's a reason why, whether and in a way it is this symbol of a shared value. I think what's been interesting and very relevant to the theme of bridging the gap is I've come to learn that, CryptoPunks have a lot of different values, have a lot of different political beliefs, spiritual beliefs, beliefs of even about what CryptoPunks are. And I think that what has been fruitful and is special about the CryptoPunks community is how those conversations can be held in mostly responsible and thoughtful ways. And so there's a lot of dialogue that happens within the community in IRL and in digital spaces that I think has been incredible, and also interesting for me to connect to folks, connect to what matters the most about knowing a human.
Well, as we were saying at the beginning, if you have your punk or your NFT as your profile picture, and then your beliefs come through that.
Yeah.
Obviously. And there's going to be such a diverse range of thoughts and beliefs of, attached to the human beings that are, behind all of this. So I think it's normal and natural that some of these conversations, whether they get very political and intense, they do happen along the way. And I just think you just got to really be respectful in the digital spaces that we are inhabiting. The same way we would if we're having a conversation like this face to face, right? And I think that's just something we all have to be aware of and acknowledge, right?
I completely agree. We can't forget that there is a human behind the pixels.
Exactly. And sometimes it is easy to forget, right?
Yeah.
So, are there any, besides CryptoPunks, who should we be looking at now? Are there any projects, people, artists, creators, or initiatives that are exciting you?
Yeah. I'll start with first this following up on the theme of bridging the digital to the physical. Summer Wagner had an exhibition here in LA.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Yeah.
Beautifully done. And I was aware of her work, but I can't say that I was incredibly drawn to it necessarily until I saw her IRL exhibition. And it helped me understand her artwork, helped me understand her as an artist. I felt her work and the way that she presented her pieces was top notch. Really unique experiments or presentations with digital screens, projections. There was tactile activities. I was very, very impressed. So now Summer Wagner is definitely an artist and a project that I'm watching. I really love everything that also it's interesting. I'm realizing I'm going to name a lot of projects that are kind of this physical digital combo. I love Helena Cerrone, and Sophia Garcia. Shout out to Sophia. Just had and it was sold out even before doors opened. And Helena has been playing with, Ghent. And then she translates this into physical pottery and ceramics, which is often, a long tradition of female craft that maybe hasn't been given the recognition that it deserves as an artwork. And so her playing in that tradition, I always think playing in the tradition of pottery and bringing that with new technology, something that's so ancient is super interesting. And then maybe a third artist, I'm starting to see, not necessarily the emergence of AI artists, but the cementation of some of these early artists I was working with back in 2017. They're becoming more part of the public, imagination. And one in particular that is known in the AI world, Memo Atkin, but hasn't totally been popularized in the Web3 space yet. Really love Memo Atkin. Definitely encourage anyone that wants to think about the potential of AI art to help us understand our humanity to look at his, I think, 2017 Learning to See series.
Okay.
Highly recommend it. Long story short, train these data models basically to only see beauty, flowers, rivers. He'll throw trash in front of the eyes of this, computer, robot, etc. And then the computer will see the most beautiful flowers and rivers. And it's just stunning. And so it's this idea, that moves me. And yeah, Memo Atkin is always, what's the word? He is uncompromising as a researcher and artist. And I highly encourage anyone to check out his work.
We'll put some of these links in the episode description. Yeah.
Exactly. And for people who can't see me, yes. I'm pointing places and there's bubbles popping up.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
For sure. I always have a question that I ask everybody.
Okay.
At the end of the episode. It's the same question, asked in a few different ways, depending who it is. But so for you, obviously you're in a pretty big position of responsibility, right? And CryptoPunks isn't the only thing you're doing in the space, but that's people know you. Your PFP is Punk 98, is
Punk
it?
98.
Yeah, Stone. I remembered that. Yeah. So, what does it mean to be a creative leader in this space?
What does it mean to me to be a creative leader? It feels like a great honor that I take with a lot of responsibility. I worked in mega corporations, and in most cases I was behind the scenes. So I've been leading teams and leading projects that had a lot of impact, but I don't think folks were necessarily connected to me, just my work. And so in this space, which is maybe a I wouldn't call it a smaller pond, just maybe a different pond. I've become to be more of like Stone, Punk 98, like a known entity, invited on podcasts, etc., to share about my experience. And that's been a new journey. It's been incredibly vulnerable, but has also been incredibly meaningful. And I try to move very consciously, and I try to move with integrity, and I try to be someone who I'm proud of. Yeah. I mean, I've had ups and downs, and there was definitely a down moment not too long ago. And I looked at myself at the end of that, and I knew myself better, and I was proud of myself. And I think that's almost all you can ask for as a creative leader, is to be an authentic human being that makes yourself proud.
By trying
to be good and care and be kind.
Show up.
Yeah. That's it.
Natalie, thank you. Beautiful answer, actually. And where can people find you? Where do you spend most of your time in the digital space?
I guess at this point it's Twitter.
It is,
yeah. If you wanna, you could check out my work on nataliestone.co. You could find me on Twitter. I'm Natalie Stone. If you want to see more of my like hippie new age content, you can try to find me on Instagram, but I'm private.
Why are you private on Instagram? A lot of people are like back home, like, I go into some of my friends' accounts or people I may have known in the past in London or in Europe. It's private, but
I don't know. You know what? Maybe I'll open it up after this podcast. I'm no longer private.
Right. I mean, you're very unprivate on X. So, thank you so much for your time, sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your beautiful energy, and bringing so much to this conversation. And the genuine questions that I was really inquisitive about, because I want to know what your daily conversations are, trying to knock the door down and bring punks into the mainstream. So
totally. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Object, Subject, Form. If you enjoyed the conversation, please rate, subscribe, or leave a comment. It helps us keep the momentum going and reach more like-minded listeners like you. Don't forget to share this episode and follow me using the links in the description to stay connected and join the conversation.